Hi, I'm Tucker from Last Moments. Today I'm looking at gender reveals, where the obsession with pink or blue swapped a new crib for an early grave. From a couple whose gender reveal sent them crashing out of an old oak tree, to a woman who sent a powder canister into the sky, not knowing it was coming straight back down to her. It was April 14th, 2017, on the rural outskirts of Athens. When the guests arrived, the sky was clear and the evening light was beginning to fade. The 6-acre property was uneven and had shallow ditches carved into the ground from rainwater. At the back of the property stood a large old oak tree that was 70 to 80 feet tall with a very thick trunk. Corinne Boyd, 32 years old, was the baby's mother. She was a first-time mom, about halfway through her pregnancy, and everything about it still felt new and overwhelming. People around her described her as creative and detail-focused, the kind of person who liked turning ordinary moments into something memorable. She and her husband, Travis Boyd, 34 years old, had built the entire reveal around the old oak tree at the back of the property. Travis handled most of the setup himself. He drilled several deep holes into the hollow trunk so pink-dyed water could spray back out under pressure, making it look like the tree itself was bleeding color. To power it, he connected a large agricultural water tank to a pump system that forced the dyed water into the hollow center of the tree. Before any of it went up, a local arborist came out to inspect the oak. He found visible decay in the trunk, soft, uneven soil around the roots, and signs of ground settling that pointed to a possible underground void. He warned Travis that adding large amounts of water could weaken the ground even further. After giving the warning, he walked off the job entirely. Travis noted the warning and kept building. And that right there is what confuses me. When someone points out a danger, I usually stop to think about it. Since Travis kept going anyway, I wonder if he actually thought that being stubborn was a good plan. So, around 25 guests arrived and gathered around the tree with phones up. Travis had already spent hours testing the pump system earlier that day, saturating the weakened ground beneath the roots before the reveal even started. When he switched the system fully on, pink water pushed into the hollow trunk and sprayed back out through the drilled openings, making it look like the tree itself was bleeding color. The crowd moved closer onto the already soft ground to get a better view. The runoff spread quickly through the soil. Within seconds, the ground shifted beneath the crowd's weight. Thin cracks spread around the base of the trunk as water pushed up through the dirt. Then a section of ground roughly 3 to 4 feet across suddenly dropped inward, sending 2 guests off balance at the same time. A hidden cavity, estimated at roughly 3 to 4 feet deep, opened beneath them as the wet soil broke apart. Travis shut the pump off. The arborist, who had returned after growing concerned about the setup and the amount of water being forced into the tree, moved toward the collapse area as guests tried pulling each other clear. Corinne was near the edge, helping pull someone else clear, when the ground under her feet gave way. She dropped into the cavity. With her weight shifting into the collapse area, the weakened root base lost support on one side. The trunk began tipping toward the opening as the root mass rotated beneath the soil. A large section of trunk and exposed roots shifted down into the collapse zone. Corinne was pinned between the shifting tree and the compacted wet soil. After the trunk settled into the collapse area, nobody could reach her without risking another cave-in. Emergency services were slowed by a narrow dirt road, with vehicles blocking the entry. Several guests suffered minor injuries during the collapse and were pulled clear before the tree fully shifted into the cavity. Responders stabilized the tree before any recovery attempt could begin. Corinne was removed after the scene was secured and was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators documented the pre-existing underground cavity, the soil saturation from the introduced water, the trunk decay, and the ground settling the arborist had flagged days earlier. Guest footage confirmed the full sequence. Travis later told investigators that the arborist had warned them about the unstable ground and weakened tree before the reveal. The damaged oak was removed after engineers determined the root system and surrounding ground were no longer stable. Travis left the property months later and reportedly stopped speaking publicly about the incident. I feel bad for Corinne. She worked hard to make this event special, but instead, she is the one who suffered. It is very sad that things turned out that way. The next victim just wanted a clean shot and a memory she could share. What she got was a neighbor who could not let a grudge go. It was June 18, 2017, in Riverside County, California. It was a very hot, dry afternoon. The yard was dusty since it hadn't rained in weeks. A wooden fence stood at the back with a few chairs sitting in the bright sun. The grass was dead, and there was no shade or breeze anywhere. Margaret Gable, 34 years old, a warehouse supervisor by trade. People who knew her said she was direct, a little bossy, the kind of person who liked things done her way and on her time. She had been planning this small backyard gender reveal for weeks. It was supposed to be her moment, a quick burst of colored smoke for the camera, a clip she could share, a memory she could shape from start to finish. That was the whole reason she was out there that day. She had rented the propane setup that morning from a local one-day operator. The tank, the hose, the nozzle. The fitting near the valve looked worn, but Margaret wasn't the type to second-guess gear once it was in her hands. She set the device about 12 feet from the wooden fence and ran through her camera angles. I can understand why Margaret was so focused on getting the shot right. She just wanted this small moment to feel special, something she could hold on to. There's one more detail worth bringing up. The neighbor next door, a man named Curtis Vance, 38, had been locked in a long fight with Margaret over a property line and a drainage issue that had flooded part of his garage twice that spring. He had taken her to small claims and lost. That morning, while guests were showing up, Curtis walked near the setup, stood close to the tank for a moment with his hands near the valve area, then slipped back through the side gate. Nobody thought much of it at the time. Margaret put off lighting it more than once. She kept fixing her phone and waving people closer. The valve stayed open through all of it, and pressure kept building while she fussed over the shot. Guests were standing within 8 to 10 feet of the tank. One man was right behind it with his camera up. When she finally stepped forward with the lighter wand, the gas hissed out loud enough for everyone to hear. A thin cloud of gas started forming low to the ground, pooling around the base of the tank and drifting outward. She tried again. Still nothing. I can feel how badly she wanted this to come out right. A simple reveal is supposed to be a happy memory, but it is now staring to go wrong. A few seconds passed before the spark finally took, and when it did, the flame ripped through the whole pocket of gas at once. The push of pressure slammed against the worn fitting. The connection gave way right then. The valve shot off at close range, and a piece of metal struck Margaret in the neck. She dropped where she stood as the tank kicked sideways across the dirt. The flame burned out within seconds, leaving scorched ground, a tipped tank, and a yard full of stunned guests. Phone videos from guests showed Curtis near the valve earlier that morning, and a tool with his prints was found tossed in the brush along the fence line. Under questioning, he admitted he had loosened the fitting, claiming he only wanted to ruin her moment, not hurt her. He was charged and later convicted of second-degree murder. I can say it is painful to see a day she planned with so much care come undone because of one small choice made by someone who could not let a grudge go. No one tampered with the next setup. No one loosened anything. She did everything herself, start to finish, and that's exactly what went wrong. It was September 22, 2018, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. People gathered in a small backyard for a family reveal, standing close together on the patio and near the steps. Marco Finch, 29 years old, the baby's father and a delivery driver by trade. People who knew him called him impulsive, the type who jumped into ideas fast and worried about the details later. He was there for his own family reveal, and he had built the moment around a handheld powder cannon he wanted to set off himself, up close, right over his chest, so the color would burst straight into the camera. He wanted the shot to feel big. The powder for the cannon did not come from a proper supplier. A friend had brought him a small unmarked container, taken from a workplace without anyone checking what it actually was. The powder was very fine, more like industrial dust than party powder. It had a dry, almost metallic look to it, and when disturbed, it clumped and broke apart into an extremely dense cloud, rather than dispersing cleanly. Marco loaded the tube full, packed in tight, and waved guests in closer so the cloud would land on them too. People stood within arm's reach. Several were directly in front of him with phones up. I've actually been at a party where someone tried to DIY a confetti cannon. It didn't explode, but the mess it made was enough to remind me why I'd never stand right in front of one. When he triggered the cannon, the charge fired straight up out of the tube. There was a sharp, compressed blast, louder than expected, and the powder exited as a tight, pressurized column rather than a loose burst. The cloud came out dense and stayed dense. Instead of spreading and thinning the way normal party powder does, the fine particles hung in the air in a thick column right above him. Marco was standing directly inside that column. The first breath he took pulled not just dust, but a concentrated mass of fine particulate straight into his mouth and throat. Witnesses later said he immediately jerked back, clawing at his face, as if something had gone down wrong. Within a few seconds, he lowered the cannon, took a step, and dropped it. He tried to cough, but the sound was wet and obstructed, like his airway wasn't clearing. He went down forward onto the concrete as the cloud kept settling around him. Guests near the front pulled back fast, coughing and covering their faces with shirts and hands. A couple of them tried to reach him, but the air around his body was still full of powder, and they had to back off and wait for it to settle before getting close. The yard cleared out toward the fence line while someone called for help. By the time anyone reached him, he was unresponsive, with visible residue coating his mouth and nose. By the time responders arrived and ventilated the area, the worst of the cloud was on the ground and on every surface within about 10 feet of where he fell. Investigators recovered the cannon, tube, and unmarked container. Testing showed the powder was a fine industrial particulate not meant for inhalation. At high concentration and force, it could mix with moisture in the airway and form a dense, obstructive slurry. The friend who supplied it admitted taking it from work without checking its contents. The close-range, packed load and still, humid air prevented the cloud from dispersing, leaving Marco in its densest concentration when he inhaled. Marco died from acute airway obstruction and respiratory failure after inhaling a pressurized burst of fine industrial particulate at close range. The case ruled an accidental death tied to the use of an unapproved substance in a homemade reveal device. I joke about being clumsy with party props, but at least my worst mistake was spilling punch, not loading industrial dust into a cannon. Have you ever moved towards something because you wanted the shot that badly? That's the last decision the next victim made. It was July 30th, 2017, in San Bernardino County, California. It was a very hot, dry day. The heat was so strong that it dried out the grass, making the ground crunch whenever you walked on it. The event took place in an open field on the edge of a farm. The brown, dead grass grew as high as a person's waist and covered the whole area. Beth Mercer, 27 years old, the baby's sister, and a freelance photographer by trade. People around her described her as energetic and quick on her feet, the kind of person who lived behind a camera and was always looking for the better angle. She was there to capture the reveal for the family, and she had picked out her spot ahead of time, about 20 feet back from where the fireworks would go off. From there, she could frame the whole burst against the open field. The plan was simple on paper. A cousin would light the fireworks, Beth would film. The rest of the family would watch from farther back near the vehicles. What nobody thought about was the ground. No clearing was made around the firing point. The dry grass sat right up against the base of the launch spot. Guests stood in scattered groups, and a few were downwind without realizing it. As a photo enthusiast myself, I always look for the perfect shot, but I make sure that safety comes first in everything I do. When the fireworks were lit, the first few sparks dropped straight down into the dry grass. They caught right away. Within a few seconds, small flames appeared in more than one spot near the launch point and started spreading outward in a low, fast line. Beth saw it forming and stepped closer instead of back. She wanted the shot of the fire line taking shape. The wind picked up the spread and pushed it sideways, then began curving it around behind her position. By the time she turned to move, the flames had already closed off the easiest path out. The fire took her before she could get clear of the grass. The other guests near the vehicles backed away as the fire kept growing. A few tried to call out to her, but the smoke and the speed of the spread made it hard to see where she had gone. People retreated toward the road while someone called for help. Crews arrived and worked to contain the blaze, but the dry conditions made it move faster than anyone could chase. After the fire was put out, Beth was found inside the burned area, in the path the flames had curved through. Investigators traced the ignition point back to the launch spot and confirmed the fireworks as the source. Phone video from family members showed the spread happening within seconds and the wind shift that pushed the fire behind her. The dry grass, the lack of any cleared zone, and the steady low wind were all listed as conditions that made the spread possible. Beth died from injuries caused by exposure to the fast-moving grass fire that started at the gender reveal. Beth wasn't just filming for herself, she was documenting for her family. The lesson here is that when we take on responsibility for others, we owe them caution as much as creativity. The next woman wasn't behind the camera. She was the one in the air. It was May 12, 2018 in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. The weather was nice, with gentle light and a light wind blowing through the trees. The spot for the party was on a slanted piece of land near the forest. Davina Riggs, 31 years old, the baby's cousin, and a fitness instructor. Her co-workers described her as thrill-seeking, the kind of person who never picked the small version of anything. She was there to add the standout moment to the family reveal. The plan was for her to ride a zip line across the clearing with a powder pack tied to her waist and burst the color over the guests below as she passed the midpoint. She wanted the reveal to feel different from any other one they had been to, and she had been talking about the idea for weeks. The rigging was done that morning using basic straps and hardware she had picked up herself. No rated climbing gear, no locking carabiners, just standard tie-downs wrapped around the two trees. She tested the line at a low load by hanging from it for a few seconds near one of the anchors, but never under her full body weight at speed. The powder pack was clipped to a belt around her waist. Guests gathered below in the clearing, most of them within 15 to 20 feet of the line, looking up with phones ready. I can see why Davina went for something this big. She wanted the reveal to feel real, a moment her family would remember and talk about for years. When she launched, the line held at first. She picked up speed quickly along the slope, with the slack tightening as she moved. Around the midpoint, the load on the anchor points spiked. One of the wrapped straps at the high end began to slip. The line went loose for a split second, then dropped as the strap pulled free of the tree. Davina fell straight down from about 15 to 20 feet up. She landed on her back on the firm ground below. The powder pack burst on impact and threw a wide cloud of color over her and the guests nearest to where she came down. For a moment, the air was full of pink dust, and nobody moved. The line whipped back through the trees and dropped into the brush. Guests rushed in once the dust settled, while others backed away to make room. Someone called for help right away. The slope made it hard to move her safely, so most people stayed close and waited. The pack kept leaking color into the dirt around her as responders made their way in. After the scene was cleared, investigators recovered the strap, the line, and the anchor points. The strap at the high end was found loosened and worn at the contact point on the tree. There were no locking pieces in the rigging, and nothing in the system was rated for the kind of moving load she put on it. Phone video from guests captured the slip and the drop clearly, and the angle of her fall matched where she came to rest on the ground below the failed anchor. Davina died from blunt force trauma to the back and had caused by the fall after the zipline anchor gave way under load. When we're chasing a moment that we want to be unforgettable, is the risk ever worth the memory? Stay with me, because this next one happened in a flat backyard. Nothing overhead, nothing rigged, nothing moving, and she never saw it coming. It was August 9, 2016 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The air was very hot and sticky, like it usually is during the summer. It felt like the heat was stuck in one place. The party was in a flat backyard on a street with houses. The ground was dry and a little bumpy by the patio. The sun was bright, so you could see everything clearly from nearby. It was a very calm, quiet afternoon, with no wind at all. Elena Clack, 25 years old, the baby's aunt, and a retail worker. Neighbors who knew her described her as detail-focused, the kind of person who took the small things seriously and liked to be hands-on with every part of a plan. She had been involved in putting together the reveal box herself, and she was proud of how it looked. Standing about 8 feet tall and built from light lumber, the structure was painted and decorated to match the rest of the party. To anyone standing in that yard, it looked solid enough. Elena and a few family members had assembled the box earlier that day. The frame was made from light boards nailed together, but no internal bracing was added to stiffen the structure from the inside. The ground where it sat was not completely level, and the box leaned just slightly forward, though not enough to make anyone stop. Inside, balloons and a release mechanism had been packed in to fill the space. The whole thing was meant to swing open from the front, letting everything spill out at once toward the guests. Elena planned to be the one to open it herself. She stood directly in front of the latch while guests gathered around and phones went up. I actually built something similar for a surprise party a few years back. A wooden frame with a drop front, and I remember standing back and thinking it looked great right up until it started wobbling the second someone bumped it. I did not use bracing either, and honestly, I think the only reason nobody got hurt was luck. When she pulled the latch, the front panel did not drop cleanly. It swung down on one side faster than the other, which sent the weight inside shifting forward and off-center all at once. The uneven ground and the lack of any internal support meant there was nothing to hold the frame in place once the load moved. The upper section tilted toward her, slowly slowly at first, then faster. She had no time to step back. The top of the structure came down directly onto her and drove her into the ground beneath the frame and the spill of balloons and boards. Guests moved in fast. Several people grabbed sections of the frame and pulled them off, while others pushed debris aside. The balloons scattered across the yard as people worked to clear the structure. Elena was found on the ground beneath the heaviest part of the upper frame. Nails that had held two of the main joints together were found pulled loose in the dirt nearby, which told investigators exactly where the frame had started to give way. In the previous month, I covered a worn valve turned into a projectile, and a lot of you left comments saying that the story changed how you look at rented equipment. This one is different, but the feeling is the same. The danger is always in the part that looked fine. Investigators documented the full structure after it was cleared. The frame showed no internal bracing at any joint, and the nails used at the top corners were not adequate for the size and weight of the build. The slight forward lean on uneven ground made the shift worse once the front panel released. There was no single catastrophic failure, just a sequence of small structural weaknesses that added up the moment the load moved. Elena died from crush injuries sustained when the upper section of the reveal box collapsed onto her after the latch was released. The case was ruled an accidental death caused by an unstable homemade structure built without proper support. I thought that one was hard to sit with, and then I got to the next case, an event planner who had run setups like this before and had no idea the thing she built was already past the point of no return. It was April 2nd, 2018, in Orlando, Florida. The evening was warm and damp. The air was so thick that the hanging lights looked blurry. The event was in a private backyard surrounded by hedges, with a concrete area and some grass leading to a fence. Since it was dark outside, the guests could only see what Rona had set up that day. When the lights were on, the yard looked just how she wanted it to look. When the lights went out, everything became dark. Rona Fitch, 38 years old, the baby's godmother and an event planner by trade. People who knew her said she was meticulous, the type who made lists of her lists and showed up early to every setup she ever ran. She had taken charge of the reveal decoration herself, and she had gone all in. Fog machines, string lights, colored floodlights, a powered reveal display at the front. It was a proper production for a backyard, and Rona had wired every piece of it herself. The power for the whole setup came from a single gasoline generator placed about 15 feet behind the main display, tucked in near the back fence where it would be out of the way. It was partially enclosed with a folding screen to cut the noise. Multiple high-draw devices were running off splitter cords from the same outlet panel. The generator had been running for over an hour before the guests arrived, and by the time the reveal was close, it was audibly working harder than it should have been. A few guests heard the strain in the motor, but Rona was focused on the countdown, and nobody flagged it as a problem. If you were standing there and heard that generator straining, would you have spoken up or stayed quiet like the rest of the guests? When the countdown hit 0, every system activated at the same time. The fog machines, the floods, the display, all drawing at once. The generator surged under the combined load. A sharp pop came from the outlet panel, and sparks appeared at the connection point where the splitters were joined. The heat in the overloaded wiring had already been building for some time, and the surge pushed it past the point the insulation could handle. Fuel vapors near the partially enclosed engine caught without warning. Instead of a large blast, there was a sudden flash of flame that rolled out from the generator housing, followed by a harsh mechanical crack as part of the casing split under pressure. Rona was standing close to the wiring panel managing the activation. The force was limited but direct at that distance, knocking her off her feet and throwing her backward onto the concrete pad. The yard went dark immediately as the power cut out. Guests pulled back toward the house and the side gates. A few kept filming even as they moved, which gave investigators a clear record of what happened in the seconds after the rupture. The generator continued to burn in a tight, localized fire, flames licking up from the exposed wiring and engine before dying down as the fuel supply choked off. Rona was found on the concrete near the back of the setup. First responders arrived and secured the scene while the last of the smoke cleared from the enclosed yard. Investigators documented melted wiring at the splitter connections and a split casing on the generator consistent with internal pressure from a rapid fuel vapor ignition. The load calculations based on the devices connected confirmed the system was drawing well beyond what the generator was rated to handle. Running it enclosed and for that length of time made the fuel vapor build up worse. The outlet panel showed clear heat damage before the final failure point. The case was ruled an accidental death caused by an electrical overload that ignited fuel vapors in an enclosed space. That finding came from the melted wiring, the split casing, the load documentation, and the footage captured by guests during and after the event. For me, the lesson here is that safety isn't just on one person. Everyone present has a responsibility to speak up. Up next, I'm covering a woman who planned every single detail of that reveal. It was October 14th, 2015, in Lubbock, Texas. The afternoon was dry, and a steady wind blew across the flat, open ground. The sky was clear, but the constant, strong wind pushed against everything in sight. The event was held in a large backyard, with almost no protection from the wind. There was an open fence on one side and a row of power lines at the back of the yard. From where the guests stood, they could easily see those lines standing out against the sky. Sienna Taft, 41 years old, the baby's aunt, and a school administrator by trade. People who knew her described her as organized, the kind of person who thought ahead, kept a schedule, and handled details before they became problems. She had put together the reveal herself and had a clear picture in her head of how it was supposed to go. The plan was to release a cluster of balloons tied to a small weighted powder canister, roughly 10 to 15 pounds, that would ride the lift of the balloons into the air and burst open at height, dropping a cloud of color over the guests below. Sienna had placed herself directly beneath the intended burst zone, so she could manage the timing from the ground. The rig was assembled that morning. The canister hung below the balloon cluster from an attachment designed to hold under normal lift. The release point sat close to the back fence, and the overhead power lines were within range if the balloons drifted sideways rather than rising straight up. The wind had been steady all day, but it did not seem to change anyone's thinking about where to stand or where to let go. She was known for being organized, and that's what strikes me. Even organized people can miss the one variable they can't control. When the balloons were let go, the cluster caught the wind almost right away and moved sideways instead of climbing straight up. The canister swung below, carried with it. The rig drifted toward the back fence until the canister snagged against one of the overhead lines. The balloons kept pulling forward under the wind pressure as the two forces worked against each other from opposite sides. The attachment snapped. The canister dropped straight down from the height of the power line and came down directly on Sienna, who was still standing in the burst zone below. The impact put her on the ground. The balloons, freed from the weight, drifted away over the fence and out of sight. The canister landed near her with the side cracked from the fall. Guests close to her moved in immediately while others pulled back toward the house. Someone called for help fast, and responders arrived while she was still on the ground. Investigators recovered the canister and the attachment hardware from the scene. Guest footage captured the lateral drift of the balloon cluster, the snagging on the line, and the drop in a sequence clear enough to reconstruct exactly what happened. I've overlooked things like that before when I was focused on the plan, and it makes me realize how blind we can be when we're locked in on one idea.